Listen to Bart Ehrman and myself discuss the extra biblical sources for Jesus.
When my students are interested in learning about the historical Jesus, I tell them what the situation is. We don't have any references to him in the first century except for Josephus.
Could you say that again, Bart, and a little slower for those in the back?
We don't have any references to him in the first century except for Josephus.
So there is no historical reference to Jesus in the first century except for Josephus. But what you fail to acknowledge is that even that reference to Jesus in Josephus is a highly dubious reference to Jesus, and it cannot be trusted or relied upon.
And that we don't have any pagan references to him until Pliny the Younger, about 20 years later, in the year 112 or so.
So now we're in the 2nd century and 80 plus years after the supposed death of Jesus, and Pliny makes a reference to Christians, not to Jesus. Pliny is just saying that Christians believed in Jesus, and there were many people who believed in many different gods.
And then you start getting references to Jesus.
And then you start getting references to Jesus in the 2nd century, over 100 years after the supposed events.
You don't get much information about Jesus outside of Christian sources.
So what is the responsible thing to do when you have a religion that is created based on supernatural claims that are not corroborated by unbiased sources?
So whenever you got one, it's like, wow, that's nice. That's good. We got something here.
So when you find this super rare 1st century reference to Jesus in what is called the Testimonium Flavianum, and then realize that it has been studied extensively and universally determined to be a Christian manipulation to some degree. Nobody thinks that the Testimonium Flavianum that we have today is original to Josephus. Nobody. The oldest manuscript of Josephus's writings comes from the 10th or 11th century, 1,000 years later. The first reference to the Testimonium Flavianum was in the 4th century under Constantine and Eusebius. When you find out that Christians had to add Jesus to history, in no way is this a valid testimony to the existence of Jesus or the validity of Christianity.
And so it's not, in this case, it's not really about what does it tell us what Jesus said and did, although he says he was known to do fantastic things and he's thought to be a wise man and to deliver teachings, and so that's all good.
Bart is not being honest here about the Testimonium Flavianum. So let me show you what the Testimonium Flavianum says, and I want you to pay attention at the glowing reviews and the supernatural claims that are given to Jesus throughout the entirety of the passage. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him many Jews and Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the 3rd day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct to this day. When you take out the obvious Christian biases from this passage, there's nothing left. I am extremely confident that this passage in its entirety is unreliable.
But it does show that that against people who today call themselves mythicists, this would speak against that.
The Testimonium Flavianum does not speak against mythicism. In fact, it supports it. When the only reference to Jesus in the entire 1st century is a highly dubious passage that is chock full of Christian biases, now you've lost the only reference to Jesus in the 1st century.
Josephus has information, and it corroborates other information that we have without being dependent on them.
I guess I was wrong. Apparently there are some people that think the Testimonium Flavianum is a reliable testimony to Jesus. It's absolutely ridiculous.